All action came with consequences. He knew that. When Yang received the call from Team Ruben, Jaune and the others had only been too willing to accompany her. Yang burst through the door and into their dorm with reckless abandon. Pyrrha and Ruby seemed embarrassed to be the subjects of so much attention. What happened? Yang breathed, rushing over to her little sister and checking her for injury. Ruby shuffled and squirmed under her sister's hands and complained about how she was fine and hadn't been hurt at all. That didn't stop Jaune from doing his own analysis, however, on both Pyrrha and Ruby. There were no bandages on the former, though Pyrrha had a few bruises on her arm. Ruby had a tiny cut on her left hand too, which Yang seemed to be paying far too much attention to. All in all, they looked to be in one piece, which allowed him to let out a long breath of relief. Ruby was always fine before. I knew I shouldn't have been so worried. It was hard though, since it had been hundreds of repeats since he let her face Cinder alone in that tower. Normally he was there too, or sometimes on his own or with others that he drew in to try and capture her. Ruby survived the first time, so it made sense she was fine now. What happened? Blake asked Pyrrha. Ruby was still busy trying to convince Yang she was okay. Normally it would have been wise to engage them, but she was unusually quiet. She had been, ever since the dance. We didn't even realize anything was wrong until Ren messaged us. My idea, Pyrrha said. I figured it would be best to get this out, since otherwise Yang would go crazy if she saw Ruby hurt. Wise choice. But what actually caused this? I doubt you'd call us over if you had a dancing incident. Pyrrha shuffled awkwardly, but after a quick look towards Ren, a nod from him, she spoke. Last night, during the dance, Ruby spotted something unusual outside the hall. I thought it was nothing, but we were both tired of dancing and decided to take a look. Jaune pretended to only be half listening, while internally he nodded at the familiar story. Ruby saw the figure on the rooftops approaching the CCT, but there didn't seem to be anything wrong when we arrived. No unconscious guard? Jaune wondered. His eyes widened a second later. He hadn't even noticed at the time, but now it felt so obvious. Penny hadn't been at the dance. He usually saw her and the two guards who watched her, but they'd all been absent. In fact, there were no Atlesian soldiers at Beacon at all. Winter came instead of Ironwood, and she came as a representative and not with a contingent of soldiers. Has the timeline changed so much? A cold sensation settled in his gut. If Ironwood wasn't at Beacon, and it was Ironwood who interrupted the fight between Cinder and Ruby, no. They were both in there in front of him alive and unhurt. The worst hadn't happened. We were about to leave when we saw a figure inside. Pyrrha continued. Obviously the CCT is supposed to be closed at night, and since the person was wandering around in the rooftops, she shrugged helplessly. It wasn't exactly subtle. An intruder in the CCT? Blake mused. The two of you fought against him? Her. Pyrrha corrected. It was a woman dressed in black with dark hair. She used twin swords and a bow. Weapons I've never seen someone use before. She was very strong. Not strong enough, clearly. No. She was stronger than I. The emission seemed to surprise the redhead. Ruby and I fought together, and we're not exactly slouches as a team. Even so, she was able to counter and push us back for a moment. I thought we might be defeated. What happened? Yang asked, her tirade towards her sister coming to an end. Pyrrha used her semblance. Ruby answered. She drew up loads of computers and terminals and started to smash them against the person. She seemed really surprised and didn't know what to do. My semblance is polarity, Pyrrha explained for the benefit of 3 members of Team Jazzberry, though Jaune made sure to make a surprise sound anyway. Ooh, it wasn't enough, and she still managed to fire some shots off towards me. One grazed my shoulder and I lost control. Pyrrha's cheeks darkened. I accidentally set some expensive machinery through the window. That explains the loud noise we heard. Weiss piped up for the first time. I thought it sounded like glass shattering. She turned to regard Jaune with a wary expression, but the moment their eyes met, she panicked and pointedly looked away. He sighed and did the same. It had been like this between the two ever since they woke up. Things had the vestige of normality, but all it took was a casual look or touch, and an awkward silence would appear between them like some great chasm. The noise drew attention, Pyrrha explained, thankfully not commenting on the awkward air. Luckily, Miss Goodwitch and Headmaster Osborne decided to investigate. That was enough to scare her away and she escaped. "Did you get in trouble for the computers?" Yang asked. Pyrrha shook her head. They both saw the intruder as she was escaping. It was enough to get us out of the trouble. They did ask us to keep it a secret, however. Pyrrha raised her hands in a "what can you do" kind of gesture when Weiss raised an eyebrow. We told our team, and it's not like Ruby wouldn't have told her sister anyway. We thought it could at least be kept between our two teams. Blake, Weiss, and Yang agreed to keep it secret, while he nodded along. So, Ironwood wasn't there to interrupt the fight, but they managed to stop her anyway. I suppose that means Cinder's virus is still in the computers. I doubt it matters that Pyrrha tossed a few of them out the window, since she uploaded it into the main servers. At least no one was hurt. "Did the headmaster say anything about it?" he asked. "Did he mention anything about what would happen?" Ruby blinked and shook her head. "No. He just told us to keep it a secret and said we fought well against an unknown enemy. No talk of Mountain Glean." Jaune wondered with narrowed eyes. Was that because he prevented Roman's speech in the warehouse from ever happening? Normally the CCT incident was a chance to impact the knowledge to Osborne and start the mission. With that gone, would it still happen? Did he need to act as Silver and pass the clue on to Crow? Did he want it to still happen? Could he afford to stop it? "You're both okay, though?" Yang asked. "She didn't injure you." Miss Sune looked at our injuries but decided they were minor, Pyrrha said. Our aura was a little low, but nothing got through. Ruby cut her hand afterwards on a piece of broken glass. "I tripped on my heels," the younger girl whined. It proved to be what finally dispelled the tension from the room and led to a teasing argument between the two sisters on whose fault that was. Ruby wanted Yang to apologize, while Yang turned it around by saying Ruby needed to wear heels more often to practice. By the look on Ruby's face, one might have believed she'd just been told she needed a leg amputated. "Thanks for letting us know." Weiss ignored the two entirely. "We're sorry we couldn't help. We would have been there if we knew." "It's fine. We just wanted you all to know." The conversation turned to easier things soon after, with Weiss almost too keen to step away from him and talk to Ren and Pyrrha, while Nora went to cheer on Ruby and Blake to try and stop her partner teasing her sister. Jaune leaned against the wall and let out a long sigh. Mountain Glean, the White Fang, the Breach. They were all monumental events which paved the way for disaster. They were also events that Osborne had no idea were happening, because he prevented Ruby from finding out about them. That left responsibility firmly in his hands, and with the lives involved, it was a hefty one indeed. I said I'd dedicate this life to my family and friends, and I intended to. But this does not mean that I should or shouldn't set events in motion here. The answer should have been obvious, and initially seemed so. But deeper thought revealed problems. If I refuse to tell Osborne, then it's true that Ruby's team doesn't have to go to Mountain Glean. But is that necessarily a good thing? Team Ruby weren't badly hurt there, and they even managed to stop the breach from claiming more lives. All in all, the mission was successful and meant a lot to them. But now, there was no Team Ruby, which meant things might go differently. There was no Ironwood either, and no telling when the general would arrive. If he only came for the festival itself, then that meant no bots to protect the civilians when the breach hit. Jaune's breath came out in a ragged exhale as he imagined the carnage that would entail. Sure, he might protect his friends from having to deal with the mission, but there was no telling if their lives would be risked in the cleanup. Even if they weren't, would they ever forgive him for sacrificing so many people? They wouldn't know, obviously, but Blake would be crushed. She would blame herself for the White Fang's inclusion. Ruby would cry herself to sleep too. They would be safe, but they wouldn't be happy. If I do make Crow aware, would Ironwood absence mean the defeat of whichever team goes? If I recall, the Atlas Navy acts as the cavalry which stops the breach. If they're not here, the team might be overwhelmed. Everyone that dies here will be alive when I repeat anyway. So is it so much to let some civilians I don't even know die instead of my friends? Ruby would have been horrified. Actually, they all would have. But they hadn't seen their friends die over and over like he had. Jaune's shoulders slumped, indecision wearing within. There was a visceral part of him which rejected the idea too, no matter how easily he fought it. I will have to make a decision sooner or later. The team assignments are soon. His daughter saved him from such difficult thoughts, sliding up to him with her bow twitching. Given up already? He asked with a smile. Nora's egging them on. Blake sighed. I know a losing battle when I see one. At this point, I think it's just going to descend into a wrestling match. Who do you think will win? Nora. Blake deadpanned, since we both know she'll jump in at the slightest chance. A smile blossomed across his face as he watched the fray. Ruby's face red, and cheeks puffed as she said something to Yang. The blonde leaned back and gave a theoretical shrug, eyes closed as she laid some no doubt terrible pun on her sister. Nora, ooh, and like the world's worst diplomat, goading them on towards sibling violence. Somehow it was so very them. Can you not look proud of this? Blake sighed dramatically. He chuckled and ran a hand through her hair. Don't be jealous, kitten. I'm proud of you too. Call me that again, and I'll show you this kitten has claws. Blake's eyes met his for all of 6 seconds before she realized what she just referred to herself as and groaned. You are honestly the worst influence on my life, and I've spent years in a terrorist organization. That should tell you something. It tells me I can cause more change in a global movement. Maybe I shouldn't be proud of you after all. I should be proud of myself. You're distracting me again. To be fair, I think you're distracting yourself. Blake didn't seem to appreciate his honest analysis and made sure he knew it, with a fierce pout. She sighed a moment later, however, and looked away. Yang asked me to talk to you about a favor. She wanted to talk to you herself, but someone needs to ask Team Ruben too, and I figured she would be better suited to that. It's about Weiss. Jaune's heart hardened, and he kept his eyes pointedly off Blake's. Ah, he said, unsure if he could say anything more. We all heard about what happened at the dance. I know you have your reasons, but Weiss is obviously quite upset, and I know you didn't mean to, she added, a hand coming to rest on his arm. I know you didn't want to either. Yang had an idea to try and cheer her up though, or at least to let her get some of it out of her system. That sounded perfect. A quick breath escaped him and he felt his chest ease just a little. Good old Yang to the rescue as usual. He wished he could help too, but it was obvious that right now, he just caused Weiss more headaches. What does she want me to do? He asked. I'll do anything. I'd be careful of saying that within her hearing. Blake chuckled. Right now, though, she wants to organize a girls' night in. A sleepover. A girls' night in, Blake corrected. Her face was steady, but he could almost sense her reluctance to admit she'd ever do something as childish as a sleepover. I'm sure she would have suggested a girls' night out, but Weiss would have rejected it. I think she'd reject us too. Which is why we're not going to tell her. Blake rolled her eyes as though to say that was obvious. Knowing Yang, it probably should have been. I'll admit, I don't see how this will help myself, but... well, I'm willing to try and Yang says it will. It's to help Weiss get her feelings out, Jaune said, resting a hand atop Blake's head. She crossed her arms and looked up to him, but didn't move away, even when he rubbed her scalp lightly. I guess you wouldn't have ever had much chance to, but it's kind of how you felt better once you explained your past and everyone forgave you. It doesn't help to keep problems bottled up. Will you ever follow your own advice? His hand froze. He caught himself a second later and tried to act natural, but it was clear Blake caught the hesitation. This is about Weiss. He laughed. Not me. Anyway, tell Yang I'm more than down on her plan. It sounds like a great idea. I take it she wants me to make myself absent? Blake looked at him for a long moment, lips set in a small frown and eyes narrowed. Whatever she was looking for, she apparently didn't find it, and sighed loudly. That's so you. She sighed. Anyway, the night in is what Yang wants to talk with Team Ruben about. She's going to see if they can put you up, or, failing that, if you and Ren can share their room and they can join us. Weiss won't open up around another team, he cautioned. She's too proud for that. You girls are the only ones she feels comfortable with. Tell Yang she doesn't need to get me anywhere. I'll find somewhere else to stay for the night. Blake's hands caught his arm immediately. Please don't sleep with someone, she whispered. Not tonight, at least. I won't, he promised. Blake, I wouldn't do that. Not to Weiss and not like that. I meant that I'll sneak into an unoccupied dorm. You know I can. Each dorm was secured by its own lock, of course, filtered onto their scrolls. But Blake seemed to easily accept the idea he could break that if he wanted to. She wasn't wrong to think so either. They had their own override codes and it wasn't like he'd never been in different rooms. Sometimes there were repeats where the dorms were different for various reasons. Thank you. Blake nodded. We don't want to kick you out, but... You're not kicking me out, he said. Don't even think of it. If I could do something to cheer Weiss up myself, I would. But... He shrugged hopelessly. I understand. We'll do what we can in your place. Aww. Jaune groaned and opened his arms wide. I have the best daughters. Blake nimbly dodged away, eyes narrowed in 1 foot place behind her to run if he gave chase. She was too adorable at times. He let her go, however, no doubt to pass on the good news to Yang. His eyes switched over to Weiss. The heiress looked calm and composed, talking to Ren and Nora. She smiled at the right moments, nodded and spoke back easily. To anyone watching, she looked fine. She'd mastered that deceit a long time ago, no doubt. Yang and Blake will help her. A chance to clear the air and talk will be good for her. I doubt she gets much opportunity with her real family. It would also give him a chance to think in peace on his latest problem. But before that, there was another set of apologies he needed to give. He made sure Weiss and the others saw him as he left the room, and flashed him his scroll as he nodded his head to say he needed to make a call. Weiss nodded back, while Yang winked and Blake smiled. They'd look after her. Jaune! His throat clogged up almost immediately when he heard the happiness, the surprise, but also the relief in his mother's voice. Hey Mum, he whispered. How are you? Great now that you called, sweetie, she said. Her face seemed to shine, and he wondered if that was anything to do with her pregnancy. Her smile was as wide as he'd ever seen it, all teeth as she put down whatever she was doing. "Oh, it's so good to hear from you. How's Beacon? How's your team? You're not hurt, are you? You look faint. Is something wrong?" The questions washed over him before he could think of an answer to any of them. The concern, though not to mention her worry, left him filled with shame. "I'm fine, Mum," he said. I'm just a little under the weather today. That's all." "Well, that's no good. Have you had enough to eat?" "I've eaten. At least half a bowl of porridge and some water." "Are you okay? How's the baby?" "Growing day by day," Juniper laughed. "I'm a little bigger now, a little less mobile too." "Should you be standing? You're not cooking, are you, Jaune? After the amount of children I've had, trust me to know what I can and can't do." Her rebuke was light and delivered with a smile. "You'd think your father would too, but he's been hovering around trying to cook. Your sister's almost died of food poisoning." "That's good. Not the food poisoning bit," he added when she raised an eyebrow. "Just, how are they all? Are they okay?" "They're fine, Jaune. What's wrong, sweetie?" "Nothing." Juniper sighed and placed one hand on her hip. "I'm your mother, Jaune. Don't you think I can tell when you're lying? Tell me, what's wrong?" "I didn't call." He sighed. "Huh?" Guilt and shame pulled inside of him, but he forced himself to continue. "I broke my promise. I said I'd call and keep in touch, but I didn't. I asked how they are, but if I'd done what I said I wouldn't need to ask. I'd know. I'm the worst brother. I'm the worst son, and I'm so..." Juniper Ark burst into laughter. It cut through his apology and continued as she bent over the screen, the scroll clanking against the work surface as she lost control. It was only when it moved and she appeared once more that he saw her wipe a tear from her eye. "Is that what's bothering you?" she asked. "Oh, sweetheart. You're so precious sometimes. No one blames you for that. But I promised to call. I promised I would call. And you have," she said. "Your sisters made you promise, but I don't think they expected you to literally call every day. I'm sure they'd love it if you did, but they know you have your own things to do every now and then." She pushed some hair that had fallen loose when she laughed away from her face. "If anything, your sisters have been waiting for this opportunity. They've probably been counting the days so they can use it as blackmail." Her face softened. "We're not going to hate you because we don't hear from you for a few weeks. They should. He promised to stand by them and failed." "Now come on." Juniper smiled and sat down. "I'll tell you about your sisters if you do the same about your time at Beacon." And just like that, without a single condemnation, she forgave him. It was too dizzying to understand, even as he listened with rapt attention as she told him about what was going on back in Ansel. He listened of how Hazel and Jade had argued, sworn to never speak again, and made up, of how Sapphire had used her training to break up a fight and protect an elderly woman from a mugging. He also learned how Amber made friends with a polite young man in school and couldn't stop talking about how much of a nice guy he was. The latter led to some hyperventilation before Juniper told him to calm down and trust his sisters to make sure Amber was okay. He wouldn't, and the guy would suffer from Jaune's wrath if he ever found him, but he pretended to accept it. In turn, he told her about Beacon, about the argument between Weiss and he, and how Yang and Blake had conspired to trick them into making up. She laughed when he told her how Weiss's sister came to visit and mistaken their friendship for something more. She also gasped when he revealed the tale of when he took an attack for his partner. In the end, however, it was sympathy she responded with when Jaune finished with the dance. "That poor girl," Juniper sighed. "I thought there was something there, but I'll admit, I thought you might have felt the same." There was no answer he could give to that, and so he kept silent. "Still, I take it you let her down gently?" "As best I could," he said. Yang and Blake went to have a sleepover tonight to try and help her get over it. That's sweet of them. They're good girls. They really are, he chuckled. They look up to you, you know? He snorted. I got no idea why. I must be the worst role model in the world. Are you? I think your sisters would disagree. They look up to you as well. All but 2 of my sisters are older than me, he pointed out. And yet, they still look up to you. Why do you think Sapphire took up the sword? Why do you think Hazel and Jade demand your attention so often? Sable boasts about you all the time, and you are one of the few people Coral cares enough about to have a meaningful conversation with. Juniper giggled. You can deny it all you want, but they all look up to their little brother almost as much as they do their dad. There was a long pause where she watched him, only for her smile to fade a little after. You don't even believe it, do you? Her concern spurred him to life. No, I do. It's just... Well, I'm surprised. That's all. He scratched the back of his head and grinned. Those girls are crazy to think so much of someone like me. There are much better people in the world. People like Ruby, Wise, Pyrrha, Nora. All of his friends who rallied behind a fraud who didn't really deserve it. Jaune, do you think you judge yourself so harshly because you've set your targets too high? Your sisters love you. You saved my life, and you saved the life of your teammate. Isn't that enough? It was never enough, not with what came in the future. My silly little boy. His mother sighed. Tell me again why you turned that lovely young woman down. Was there something wrong with her? No! The denial came out instantly, if only because of how sick he was of hearing it. There was nothing wrong with Weiss. Then why? We wouldn't have worked out together. Weiss is... She's a great person. Kind, smart, and beautiful. She deserves better than some lazy man-whore who doesn't even care about being a huntsman. He let out a long sigh and massaged his forehead. She deserves to be happy. I don't think she could be happy with me. Maybe she would immediately, but the excitement would wear off. She deserves a guy who would take her on dates, shower her with praise, and worship the very ground she walks on. Not someone like him went unsaid, but Juniper caught it nonetheless. Did you ever consider that she might not want someone like that? She asked. Did you ever consider that she might not care? Of course, but this was different. I care. He said, it matters to me. And so, you'll make her unhappy in order to fulfill your own flawed sense of what she deserves. Even when you slept with all those women. I don't think I've ever heard you sound so callous. It's not flawed, Jaune protested. She deserves better than me. She deserves better than some man-whore. And whose fault is that? You could be better, if you chose to be. Juniper sighed and shook her head. The only person who determines how good you are is you. If you're going to use the excuse of doing this for her, then don't give such a lazy reason. Then again, if I know my son, it sounds to me like you're not just doing it for her. His eyes drifted shut as he let out a long sigh. She saw right through him. One of the only ones who could. It's not just about that, he admitted. There are reasons I said no. Selfish reasons. Those are the only ones that count. Why else should you make a choice that affects your life if not for selfish reasons? Is it that you couldn't return her feelings? No. Is it that you don't want to return her feelings? He didn't answer. Couldn't answer. If he allowed himself to feel that way once more, then all he did was open himself up to the agony that would come when she died. His sleep was already plagued by Pyrrha's death, by Ruby's, Blake's, and Nora's, by the deaths of every woman he'd ever loved and lost. He didn't think he could survive adding one more. "I won't push," his mother whispered. "But son, don't you think that you deserve a little happiness too?" "I am happy," Jaune said. "I'm talking to you. Tell me more about this guy Amber might be meeting with." The distraction proved a good one, for Juniper sighed and dove into the tale once more. For now, he wanted to forget about what was going on.